it's a real pleasure for everyone in the team to have Will presenting to us tonight. We were just debating before we let you all in that last week a number of you here no doubt saw Gabe Brown either at the Cherries farm in Hertfordshire or up further north in Northumberland. And it's a real treat to have Will and Gabe in the space of a week for us UK folk here who don't always get such amazing access to these farmers. So Will, as many of you know, Will farms in Georgia, in Bluffton, and he's farming white oak pastures. And we're going to hear for the next 20 minutes from Will, who sadly has got a slightly constrained voice because he's had flu, but thankfully he's still joining us tonight. So we'll hear from Will for 20 minutes, and then we'll move into a Q&A session, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions from the audience, and I've even got some myself. We'll also be joined at that point by Carrie Balcom, who is the Executive Director of American Grassfed, our sister organization in the United States. And we're going to have a kind of three-way Q&A. And if people do have questions, I would urge you to kind of stick your hand up. You can also put it in the chat, but I think it'd be really nice if people said the questions out loud to Will. And then from about 7 p.m. or just before 7 p.m, we'll have the award of the Russ Carrington Trophy 2022. Russ is on here too. And then from 7 p.m. we'll move into the AGM, the more formal AGM bits and pieces, and I'll give an update on what's been happening in the previous year in Pasture for Life. So without further ado, handing over to Will. Will, it's brilliant to have you here. Thank you, and I hope your voice holds up.
I hope it does too. Thank you very much, Jimmy. I appreciate you all having me here tonight, and I apologize for my voice. I'm also a little intimidated following my good friend Gabe Brown. Gabe is the guy I probably got the most respect for in this movement, and I think he's the best presenter of regenerative land management information that I know. I think of myself as more of an implementer than a presenter, and of course you'll probably figure out why as I go into this presentation. But to tell you the story about my farm, it's in the coastal plains of Georgia, very deep southwest Georgia. My great-grandfather came here in 1866. And he farmed the land all of his career, followed by my grandfather, followed by my father, and me. Today, I have two daughters helping me run the farm along with their spouses, and I have 7 grandchildren who are too little to help work much, but I have high hopes for them. The thing I enjoy most about the story of the farm is how in the 156 years it's come full cycle. The way my great-grandfather and grandfather would have farmed the land would have been multi-species production, with processing done on the farm, and the product sold locally out of necessity. My father took over the farm post-World War II, which was the real game changer for agriculture in this country, and I suspect Europe as well. And I love talking about the changes that occurred during his watch, during that era. But we could talk about them broadly as industrialization, centralization, and commoditization. And my dad was a pioneer in that movement and ran the farm very successfully for his career. All I ever wanted to do as a child was run the farm. When my friends wanted to be firemen and policemen and baseball players, I just wanted to run the farm. And I went to the University of Georgia in 1972, graduated in 1976, came home, and I ran the farm very industrially as a monocultural cattle operation, including confinement feeding, a lot of usage of hormone implants, subtherapeutic antibiotics, ionophores on the animals. I raised most of my own feed, a lot of use of tillage, chemical fertilizers, pesticides. That was before GMOs, but I would have. But I ran the farm that way successfully for 20 years. And when I say successfully, we certainly were not rich people, but I had no debt. We made money every single year. I went back and looked, and we never lost money during the 20 odd years I ran the farm industrially, and lived quite comfortably. In the mid 90s, for a number of personal reasons, not financial reasons, I became increasingly dissatisfied with that farming system, that land management system, and started moving away from it. Gabe and I have laughed before about he was doing the same thing in the upper Midwest that I was doing in deep South during the same era. We just didn't know each other. And it took me a while, and I guess it's still taking me a while to figure it out. But basically, in the mid 90s, I started giving up products and procedures that I just didn't like and figuring out how to make it without them. It started out as mostly an animal welfare issue, but quickly moved into the land management. And it was the changes I made were very thoughted changes, very intentional changes. I knew what I was doing. I knew what I didn't like. I do things differently, and ultimately figured out how to farm without those tools and procedures, and ultimately to do it profitably. Today, we talk about the three things that we think we're good at. And there are only three things that we think we're good at. But those three things are compassionate animal welfare, regenerative land management practices, and the re-enrichment of our little local community. You notice that when I told you of the intentional changes I made, it was all about the land and the animals. And that's true. That's the way it was. The changes to the community happened very organically. I'm sitting in the middle of Bluffton, Georgia right now. This is the old courthouse, the old one-room courthouse. And it sits in the middle of my farm, White Oak Pastures. The town had become literally a ghost town. There was nobody living here except old people who couldn't afford to go anywhere else, had nowhere else to go. The only business in town was a post office where you could buy a stamp. And it was a part-time post office. They were open like 3 hours a day, and nothing else was going on here. But when I changed the way I managed the land and animals, it changed the economics significantly. Over a 15 or so year period, I went from 3 minimum wage employees, starting in the mid 90s, to today, we have 180 odd employees, and I'm proud they all make well above the county average. I'm not particularly proud of what our employees make. I wish it was more, but it is significantly over the county average, and it's all I can pay them. But in doing that, my payroll went from about $1,000 a week, excuse me, to over $100,000 a week. And it brought in a lot of really great people. You know, we hired the best of the best locally, but over and above that, we brought in really talented, passionate, educated, mostly young people who came here for the lifestyle. These were very non-typical farm employees. Probably the average age would be in their 30s. Again, most of them hold graduate degrees, some of them multiple graduate degrees. Most of them had careers in other places where they were successful enough to leave it. They became successful enough that how much money they made per year, per week, was less important to them than the lifestyle. So when they moved here, I had to have a place for them to live and eat and drink and shop and play, and we built it. And the result has been, we have a very nice little town here. It has gone from a ghost town, literally, to a destination in about a 15-year period. And the point I'm making about that is that was unintentional. We did not set out to do that. Again, the changes we made in the land management system and the animal management was very intentional. I had no idea that we could even have that impact on the town. So the result is what I had hoped is that when I started changing the way I farmed and became excuse me became passionate about it, that and I became convinced that it would work economically. I thought that maybe we would be really early innovators in changing the way food is produced in this country. I still harbor a little bit of hope for that, but I do not see it coming as the tsunami that I had hoped that we would see. You know, now I feel that any change that we can help bring in will be little bitty bubbles instead of a big tsunami. Last year, we founded a nonprofit, a 501c3, what we call them in this country, called Center for Agricultural Resilience. And the purpose of it is to teach what we've learned over the last 20, 25 years. It is not a how-to farm course. I really don't believe much in how-to farm courses. I think that how-to farm is far too excuse me, far too situational for that to be very effective. What CFAR teaches is a 30,000-foot view of how the food production system can be different. It's meant to be thought invoking. And while we do have a lot of farmers come here, it would be way less than 50% of the people who come for that. We have a lot of environmental attorneys, land planners, food industry people, people who are more interested in the system than how to actually produce crops. We do have an intern program that I've become very proud of. I started the intern program in self-defense. I didn't particularly want one, but we were inundated by people who wanted to come here to learn to farm, and they were willing to come here for free. But understandably, if they came to work for free, they felt like, understandably, that they could come and go as they saw fit and do what they wanted to. And I simply can't run a business like that. And I have workers' comp considerations, insurance that I have to be cognizant of. So we sat down and hammered out an intern program that has persisted really well in its original form. We take 6 per quarter, 4 times a year, so 24 per year. And during the 3 months they're here, they literally go through the whole production system. They get a syllabus and they're assigned to various managers for a week during the time they're here. I should tell you that today our enterprises, production enterprises, are cows, hogs, sheep, goats, rabbits, chickens, turkeys, geese, guineas, ducks. And we hand process them in 2 USDA processing facilities that I built here on the farm. each species has a manager. So these, I almost said young interns, some of them are not so young. These interns will work for a week at a time for each of those managers. We're considering and we're not just considering, we're actually piloting a processing internship, but that's not open to the public yet. I told you that I felt forced into it because it allowed me to set the rules on how people came here to learn. And not only did it work, but it was very, very successful for us because we wound up hiring nearly half of the interns who come here, or people who come here for the intern program. We extend offers to about, a job offer is not guaranteed, but we wind up extending job offers to about half of them. And well over half of the interns we extend job offers to wind up taking it. So we have wound up filling our ranks with a lot of these great, great, great people that we would never be able to get if we were managing the farm as I did for the first 20 years. I think I'll hold off there and see if there are any questions. And if I see some things in the chat, I can't see the chat. I see there's 8 comments in it. So let's see what people want to hear. And then that's a little better than me trying to think about what you might want to hear. Okay?
Thanks, Will. I mean, I certainly have a few questions, and I mean, for me, listening to what you say, which is really, really impressive. I think the most profound thing is what you've managed to do in your local community, and I think it's fair to say over here at the moment, the question is still somewhat stuck at the stage of should we be engaging with big supermarkets and people who have scale at the moment to get these farming practices off the ground, or should we be trying to start from scratch? And I think your example is a really, really impressive argument for starting from scratch and human agency.
Can I comment on that first thing you said?
Yeah.
So I should tell you that I live in one of the poorest counties in the United States of America. In fact, Forbes magazine said that in 2020, this county was the poorest county in America based on household income. There's some other criteria that we weren't the poorest. I don't know how those calculations are done, but it's a very impoverished area. So the point of that is I don't have a very good local market. I have a very bad local market compared to most of the economies that I'm familiar with. And so when I built this business, I built it purely on wholesale grocery. We later added some wholesale food service, but it was, I was 90, I mean, you might as well say almost 100% wholesale grocery when I started. And we enjoyed some very profitable years. Our timing happened to be very, very good. I built, well, I sold Whole Foods Market the first pound of American grass-fed beef that they marketed as American grass-fed beef. That was in 2002, I think. And it was at the time, it was just very lucky, not skillful on my part, absolutely lucky, but it really caught on, and we had some profitable years. Our business is not nearly as profitable as it used to be, mostly because the margins have run out on the wholesale grocery and food service. It's got to do with a lot of greenwashing that happens, mostly international, in imported products that are brought in. And so we're now trying to move our business from the wholesale model to selling online. COVID showed us that there's probably more potential in online than we had previously thought. And we're currently spending a lot of our time and money and effort converting from wholesale to direct to consumer.
I'm going to ask one more question before I pass it around. Have you had to raise capital at any point during your journey? And if so, how did you go about doing that?
Cash management is without a doubt, the hardest part of what we do. I mean, in fact, everything else is delightful, but the cash side of it is hell. I don't have any partners or investors. Everything that I did for, well, I was blessed to inherit a paid for farm and some cash, not a tremendous amount, but some. And I leveraged the hell out of that and ultimately I spent $7.2 million on my processing capacity. That's not at one time, but through the years to build up where we got now. I bought land, I've done some other things, but I always did it with debt, just leveraging, making money and leveraging it, making money and leveraging it. And now that the business is less profitable, I told you it's less profitable than it was. Cash flow is really hard for us. And we just did a refinance this summer. I think it'll help a company called Replant Capital, REPLANT Capital, is offered us some terms that are very attractive because it supports regenerative land management. But no investors, all done with my own equity and bank debt.
Okay, what I'm going to try and do now, I'm just going to add it. I'm going to try and bring Johnny in, who has a question to ask. Johnny, are you able to ask it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jimmy. Will, that was fascinating. I was wondering what the catalyst was for changing your mind, and whether there was a particular event which led to you changing your approach.
Well, I was good question. I'll say that I absolutely loved farming industrially for many years. It suited my personality, very Western, linear, more is better, alpha male, which is the way we approached life. But I was an abuser. If more is better, I was the more is better guy. If the labeled herbicide or insecticide rate said a pint, I used a quart. I started with a quart. I might go up. If the amount of injection to give the cow was 1 cc per 100, I started with 2 cc's per 100. Not to my credit, I'm just telling you what's true. But because I was abusing an abuser, I saw the unintended consequences more starkly than if I'd been playing by the rules. So I didn't like it much. So I started moving away from it. And if you drink a shot of whiskey every night, you probably will be an alcoholic. If you drink a quart of whiskey every night, you probably will become an alcoholic. And I was the heavy-handed guy.
Thanks, Johnny. I'm now going to bring in John Thorns. Are you able to ask your question, John?
Yeah, my question was about growing crops. I have some turkeys and chickens as well as my cows, but I have to buy lots of feeds in for my turkeys and chickens. They eat grass, but that's only about 30%. So how do you cope with your animals, and do you buy things in or do you grow them?
John, I do buy grain feed in for my monogastrics, the pigs and poultry. I love to grow it myself. I love closing cycles and closing systems, and we've done a lot of that. But I don't have enough land to fully run my red meat and poultry plant. So when I acquire another piece of land, I immediately put it in perennial pasture So I hadn't had the extra land to put into feed production, but I would like to. We do have about a 5-acre vegetable garden that we grow, and we are planting at a very slow rate fruit trees and nut trees of different varieties. Fairly experimental to see what we make work.
Just asking a quick follow-on question to that, because it's a pretty hot topic over here at the moment. What's your feed composition for pigs, poultry, animals that aren't grazing all the time?
We've just gone to we've been on non-GMO for quite some time. We just went to a non-corn, non-soy, which I think's got a lot of grains in it, a lot of wheat, some crab meal, those kind of things. And I'm a little worried about the economics behind that. We did that because of customer request. And of course, the monogasters don't perform as well, don't grow as fast, and the feed's a lot more. So I'm not sure that our customers will be willing to pay enough difference for us to make that work, but we're trying.
Thanks, John. I'm going to bring in now, just partly to give Will a short break for his voice. I'm just going to bring in Carrie. Hi, Carrie. Sorry to just shock you there, but you're now on screen. So this is Carrie, everyone. So Carrie is the executive director, as I said, of American Grass Fed, and Will's just referenced working with Carrie in 2002 when Will started selling into Whole Foods. And I suppose my question to bring Carrie in is, I think it's fair to say that both our kind of mission here at Pasture for Life and yours at American Grass Fed is how do we get more people farming like Will and doing more things like Will? And I was kind of curious to know what are the good things happening in the US at the moment around that question, the kind of getting more people involved. Is there anything you can comment on that?
Sure. Thank you very much for inviting me today. We've learned that farming by example is the only way we're going to do it. We have an uphill battle with our administration and our government with subsidies for big industrial ag. We're turning the herd a little bit on that with some policy changes and some things, but it's the deck is stacked against us as far as subsidy, crop insurance, all those kind of programs and things. So Will's example, Gabe Brown's example, people are doing it because they want to do it. Social media has been a huge benefit for us because we can show them the little red barn really means a little red barn. It's like in Will's case. If you go to his website, you see all the industries that he has on his farm. There's a resurgence in going back to the way things were to get away from industrial food production. People want to know what they're putting in their bodies and what they're feeding their children. So that's been a big help. COVID, for as horrible of a pandemic as it was, brought people to us because the store shelves were empty. And our farmers were still producing. They had abattoirs. They didn't shut down the big meat packing. When they shut down the big meat packing plants, Will's plant and Greg Gunthorpe's and all these other plants stepped up to keep the supply chain moving. A lot of it was, of course, Will and I both know was orchestrated for media purposes, but it was really telling for us. We don't, in our education programs, we promote Will's education programs and other programs. We're trying not to industrialize and institutionalize on-farm training, like Will said. You come to learn, not to be taught, because that makes a difference. And AGA, with its small staff and the passion, we realized that we had to get involved with policy. So I would probably say, with Will's help and a few other board members, I probably spend 50% of my time working on policy, and that's where we have to go. We can't get in the room unless we beat down the door. So that's what we're doing now. And we're also right now, we're showing people that there are other things that they don't think about in their everyday lives. We have a Hyde project going on. Will has a Hyde project. He has pet food, pet treats. He has all the tertiary markets on his farm, and we're showing people that these farms can be beneficial to their communities by keeping that open space. So that's pretty much what we're doing now. And I feel like I'm taking time away from Will because he's just scratched the surface on what his
Well,
yeah,
I think
know.
I'm going to latch on to something, in fact, you've both said, which is something that is of critical importance over here, which is abattoirs. And we're still here in a dire situation where we're losing about 10% of our small abattoirs every year. It has a policy angle because the government are very, very slow at picking up on this problem and the impact it's going to have, particularly on small scale farmers. Many of the people in the room here would be using a small local abattoir. So I suppose, it's a question for both of you, perhaps to Will. It's what was it like setting up an abattoir? What were the challenges? And perhaps to Carrie, is this something that, on-farm abattoirs, is this something that's a kind of viable future, do you think, in the US with government support or not? So Will, perhaps to you first.
So we could not have done what we've done had we not built our own farm abattoir. The capacity simply was not here for us to process what we needed to process to make things happen the way they have happened. So I have no regrets from that perspective. That said, I never wanted an own farm abattoir. I never wanted to have anything to do with the processing business. It's still not something I enjoy being a part of. There's no moral judgment there. It's just I enjoy production. I do not enjoy processing. I was very, very blessed when I built my plant to hire a young man. His name is Brian Sapp, who the ink was still wet on his graduate degree in meat science from the University of Florida when I hired him. I was about half through my plant, and he came up here, and he is today one of the 7 directors that runs this farm, and he manages our processing side of our business pretty autonomously. All 7 directors are involved in everybody's business here, but he is processing that falls under his auspices of his department, and he manages it pretty autonomously. I guess a warning I would give you is, if you are a producer and you have figured out regenerative land management and good animal husbandry, and you sit at a point where you said, if I could just get it processed, everything would be lovely. But it may not. When you get it processed, you certainly have to get it processed, no doubt about that. Consumers don't buy hogs and cows and sheep, they buy beef and pork and lamb. But when you get it processed, that does not mean you're going to be able to sell it, because market access is hell. I don't know much about Europe, but in this country, the fact that you've got a great product and it's processed and ready for the market does not mean you will get into the market. So the monetization is very hard. So I don't say that to dissuade anyone from entering into processing. I say it to warn them that don't just enter into processing. Be sure you've got the market access for monetization base covered.
Harry, anything to add on the kind of wider context?
Yeah, we lobbied hard and heavy the government to change their funding schemes for grants and funding for small processing. we're kicking the can, but the can's got we're not getting very far, but we did get some relief from the government to build processing plants. And the shutting down of the big processing plants in the United States during COVID helped a lot with that. Of course, Will's got 2 on farm. He's got a 0, both of them are 0 waste. And showing in applying for these programs and showing that they can do 0 waste. I think that's critical. And it's a hard target, but we also have a group here called the Niche Meat Processing Assistance Network, and I'll try and put a link in the chain. And Rebecca has done a great job of bringing small processors together to help them traverse the behemoth of regulation, I think. And it also helps with when we have rogue inspectors on farms who are trying to shut these plants down. And Rebecca does a great job with that. Greg Gunthorpe, who's on our board of directors, does a great job with calling out the government officials who try and shut these plants down. So I'll put a link to that in the chat as well. Processing, yes, is a problem. In order to sell across state lines, you have to have a USDA federally inspected plant. Some of the folks are deciding they don't want to deal with that, so they sell in state only. So, and that's another way to get around it. Custom plants. Well, get your opinion on custom plants. They're something that is necessary and needed, but they don't have any bandwidth for moving the food system along in any viable way. And Chris, when you asked the question about do you think change can be moved faster by the lead of consumers, that's the only way it's going to happen. The consumers are going to have to go and say, consumers are our best advocate. I've said it before a couple of times. Consumers are our best ammunition to get things done. Like I said, we've gone from when we started. And by the way, Will is number 1 on our membership list. So we're very proud of that. But we've gone from a start of 13 to, I think we have about 600 certified members, and we have about between $6,000 and $10,000, 6,000 and 10,000 people who listen in on our podcast and our social media and that kind of thing, and go onto our website. The website is you can't stress enough to have a really good, viable website. And as much as we want to tell everybody that we all defeated the Indians with grandma with her shotgun rifle, we need to get it. That has to be a good tool. And then you've got 3 clicks before they go somewhere else and look for some other things. And what Will said was very important too, is a lot of our producers are bypassing grocery and going to on-farm internet sales. And I know in the boxes that we get from Will, there's always a treat of a dog bone or a dog treat or a piece of leather or something and that kind of thing. So you have to diversify. And I know that most of his managers, when Will says, we want to do this, they all shake their heads and go, I don't want to do another thing on this farm. But the town that he's built is amazing. And he also has agritourism, which is really important, getting people out to your farm. And the other thing too is that when people say, come out to my farm, you need to go to the farm. Well, most people don't know what they're looking for when they go to a farm. So we do have the issue of people that are having showcase farms, and in the background it's the emperor, pulling the strings, and it's an industrial farm that has a cute little petting zoo out front, which is not the case in Will's case and Greg's case and other people's cases.
There's another question from Chris Walton as well, which I'll put to you, Will, which is around kind of collaborating with other farmers in the area. And I guess the question is, do you do it? Do you process for other farmers? And I suppose that has an impact on this sort of conversation around how we get more processing and slaughtering facilities, and is collaborating the way to go?
I think collaborating is the way to go, although I'm not the best example of it. I do not process for other farmers. I do have a producer group who raises cattle for me under my protocol. And then I buy the cattle. So when I process the cattle, they belong to me. And everything goes out as white oak pastures. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Maybe it's not very flattering. I just feel the need to control it. You know, all the money invested in it is my money. And you know, we're the ones who have fought the fight to get market access. And it needs to kind of be the way I think it kind of needs to be. And the system that we've got in place does that.
Are there any other good examples of infrastructure that has come about because of collaborations, Carrie, in the US?
There are other facilities that are not operated the way ours is, by sole ownership control. In fact, I'd say that probably most of them are not. One of the most successful processes in this country is Lorenz Meats in Minnesota. They do no marketing. They are purely processors. And they are the leadership in processing, small processor processing in this country. They do a great job. He's our go-to guy. There are a number of co-ops that have formed and seem to be working reasonably well. I'm not, generally speaking, I've just never been much of a co-op guy, but I respect it. And I know that it works sometimes. Carrie mentioned the niche meat processors associated in it was Washington State, Oregon. Where is it, Carrie? In Washington, Oregon. And they are fantastic. And they're great. We call them a lot. They're a great guide to all things in terms of meat processing, whether it's structure or regulatory compliance or equipment or whatever you need.
Okay, there was a question from Catherine Broomfield, who I think has just dropped off, but so I'm going to ask it for her.
I'm here.
Oh, you are here.
Yeah.
I lost you. Oh, there you are. Let me just pin you so everyone can see you. There we go. Do you want to ask your question?
Yeah. Hi. Well, hi, Will. Thanks very much. That was really interesting. And one of the things I found most startling about what you were saying was the impact you've had on your local community and the huge increase in people that you have got working with you and experiencing farming and working on the land. And I just wondered if you can say a bit more about what were the barriers or the reasons for not having those people before you were regen? Was it margin or mechanization, or was it just because people weren't attracted to that kind of work in farm work in that type of system? And what was the thing that unlocked it for you to go from 2 or 3 people to 100 odd?
So I mentioned that my dad's generation ushered in industrialization, commoditization, and centralization. The industrialization was hell on the climate, the land, and the water. The commoditization was hell on the quality of the food we produce. But the centralization is what really impoverished rural America. Centralization. So many of the good jobs, in quotes, moved to centralized areas and became really, really bad jobs. You went from having skilled butchers in all these little towns to having huge centralized plants that had meat processing as just a job that required no training and had no future to it. So I think it was almost exclusively an economic issue. I graduated from the University of Georgia in 1977, and that was we used to talk about the brain drain. the A and B students went away to cities and got good jobs. Us C and D students stayed and ran the farm, and that's not very flattering, but it's very true. There's a lot of truth to that, and there simply was not enough opportunity here to keep the best and the brightest. So the best and the brightest went away, and what stayed was not very progressive.
I'm going to try and group two questions we've got here from Doug, who's up in Fife, Scotland, and Bill, who's in Cumbria, the Lake District in our country. And they revolve around carbon, I suppose. So Doug was asking, can you explain a bit more about your experience regenerating degraded land and the kind of carbon dynamics around that? Is there a plateau that you've seen you might get to? And Bill's question was around the kind of the wider issue of carbon offsetting and what your take is on that. And do you think that any sort of, I suppose, any sort of carbon or biodiversity credits are a valid way of helping regenerate degraded land?
Whew, that's a bunch of questions.
It's a big question.
So, first of all, I would tell you that if you'll look on our website, whiteoakpastures.com, under the environmental stewardship tab, there was a work, LCA, life cycle assessment, done by a third party environmental engineering group from Minnesota. Qantas is their name. And it shows that our farm not only is a carbon sink, but that we literally sequester 3.5 pounds of carbon dioxide equivalent of every pound of grass-fed beef that we marketed during that period that the study went, well, it was 2 years. And I'm convinced that's the truth. And I didn't need that scientific study to tell me that. I didn't know what the numbers were, but I could take a shovel and go out in my pastures and see the carbon sequestration going on. Over a 20-year period, over a 20-year period, the carbon in our soils has gone from 0.5% organic matter to 5% organic matter. And so that's what I know about that. Now, the question you have about is there a peak? I know what you said. I think that's what I got out of it. I don't think so. I think there's a saturation point at which it's not going to go from 5 to 50. I don't think that % organic matter. But the soil will get deeper and deeper. You know, the numbers I gave you were a 6-inch slice. You know, I think that the soil can be 6 inches and 12 inches and 18 inches and 24 inches. I think that number is probably unlimited. You know, now I'm gonna wax a little cynical on you here and show you my ugly side, but I think we talk way too damn much about carbon. The carbon cycle is essential. I mean, you know, but it's no more essential than the water cycle, the microbial cycle, the mineral cycle, the energy cycle, on and on, grazing cycle. I think that we're talking way too much about carbon. I think that we're being led down the road of sucking carbon out of the air is worth a lot of money to some people, and that probably at some point there'll be technology that will suck carbon out of the air, and taxpayers will pay X dollars a ton to get that carbon sucked out of the air, and the carbon will be sequestered somewhere other than in the soil where it needs to be. So I really wish we could stop talking about just about carbon and start talking about restarting all the cycles of nature. I think they're all equally important. I think the carbon cycle is one that people can make a lot of money on. You know, I think that the same, you know, how much influence did it take to convince people that our climate change is a result of ruminant animals and not all these factories and cars and planes. How much powerful PR did that take? And the answer is a hell of a lot. And I think that the anti animal agriculture interest come from that predisposition that people had a profit motive to create. I think the same thing is being done with carbon. Carbon, there's too much carbon in the air. Carbon needs to be taken out of the air. Carbon needs to be put back in the soil where it belongs. We've got the best medium in the world for doing that, and that is good land management. So that's what I think.
Have you got a sense of whether your soils have deepened over the 20 years that you've been farming in this way?
You know, that was not measured, but anecdotally, yes, my soils have deepened. Yes.
Okay.
I think it's it's certainly a slow process. You know, I think an acre slice of soil weighs 2 million pounds. So it's a lot.
We've got a couple of minutes left, so I'm just going to finish with a question, which I'm going to repeat myself rather than getting Martin on. But could you tell us a bit more about how many cattle you've got, for example, and how this translates to kind of carrying capacity? Because that's, you know, I guess one way that farmers are able to think about approaching this question. And has this gone up or down over the 20 years that you've been managing it in this way?
It's gone up. But I've added land, but the carrying capacity per acre has also gone up. The farm here that we're on, we do some solar grazing as well, but that's separate. That's grazing sheep under big utility solar voltaic arrays. I'm taking that out of the equation. I'm just going to talk about this home farm here where I live. It's 3,200 acres. We have basically 3 herds. We've got a winter calving herd that's got about 1,000 mamas in it. A summer calving herd that's got about 550 mamas in it. And a bull herd that's our fattening herd. And so that's, and when the cows are calving, that's an average inventory of something over 3,000 head of cattle. That's total men, women, and children. Cows, bulls, and calves. That's a very high stocking rate for this country. It's you're basically talking about a cow per acre, and that's we make our own hay here on the farm. There've been a few times when they had to buy hay from off the farm, but not very many. So it's I guess that answers the question.
I think it does. So thank you everyone for the questions, and a very big thank you, Will and Carrie, for being here and answering our questions and telling us what you're up to. It's inspiring, and you know, I think, I mean, frankly, Carrie, from everything we've discussed, I feel like there are a lot of things we should be working more closely on. So let's follow this up. So we're going to move now into the next short section, which is the giving of our annual award, which is to a farmer or member who have kind of created the kind of biggest impact on behalf of the other members in an innovative way over the last year. So I'm just going to bring up Russ. So
Russ, before you bring Russ on, I want to thank you all for inviting us today. And I've enjoyed meeting with you when I've had a chance to come to the UK, and I've enjoyed visiting the farms that I have. So invite me back anytime.
Excellent. Bye, Carrie.
Thanks,
Will.
Appreciate it. Thank y'all.
Hope your voice holds up.
Come to Bluffton. We'll show you what we do.
Oh, careful. I think you're going to have lots of people saying yes.